Welcome to this EN 331 presentation on teaching speech and pronunciation. This presentation will help you understand how to include these elements in your lesson plans in order to teach good pronunciation while you're teaching the fundamentals of understanding the language. Pronunciation was once a mainstay of language instruction, and while it's still considered important, the way it is understood and taught has changed significantly. In the past, the standard of good pronunciation was that a non-native speaker could be understood by a native speaker, and that his or her accent sounded like that of a native speaker. Globalization, and with it the spread of English as a lingua franca, has shifted that standard. Now, since so many non-native English speakers in the world need to communicate in English with other non-native speakers, proficiency in pronunciation must include the ability to be understood by other non-native speakers when communicating in English. Furthermore, a person's accent in English is part of his or her origin, identity, and heritage. As the kinds of English multiply throughout the world, teachers of English should prioritize the ability to speak in clear, rather than unaccented English. For much of the last century, pronunciation was taught by breaking words down into individual syllables. Research has since shown that this style of teaching does not help students improve their speaking greatly because their problems in speaking and understanding spoken English are holistic. There are 4 aspects of pronunciation that students struggle with, and focusing on these aspects will improve their speaking much more than practicing individual syllables. First, there's clustering. English is not spoken robotically, word by word, with a pause in between each word. Rather, it's spoken in clusters. Practicing whole phrases or clusters of words will help students learn to listen and speak holistically as native speakers do. Second, reductions. Native speakers do not, of course, pronounce all the syllables in a word as it is written, but students are often confused by hearing words in reduced form, like can't instead of cannot, with some consonants removed or omitted, especially when used in whole sentences. Especially for students whose previous training has been largely visual, reading and writing, it can be very uncomfortable to speak words differently than they look. Teachers can encourage them to improve their speaking and listening skills by pointing out that these reductions happen and have students practice pronouncing them. Hesitations. English speakers indicate uncertainty with pauses and sounds such as and well. It can be fun and gratifying for students to learn and practice these sounds, as they often feel unsure of what to say next, and having a casual, colloquial way of communicating this gives them a sense of reassurance that there's a correct and acceptable way of saying, I don't know, that makes them sound more, not less fluent. Stresses. English is an accented language, and part of teaching pronunciation is explaining what stresses are and where they fall, particularly on long, polysyllabic words. Some portion of class time can be devoted to learning how to say these words, either by having the students copy the teacher or asking them to guess first where they think the stress should go. However, some students will have a much better ear than others, and so it's important not to spend too much time on such exercises because those students will feel positively reinforced, while those with less oral ability will or may feel demoralized. In any classroom, there will be a wide range of pronunciation ability based on 6 main factors. 3 are fixed and 3 are changeable, and a good teacher will take all of them into account. The factors that cannot be changed are age, native language, and innate phonetic ability. In terms of age, prepubescent children have the best chance of achieving a completely native accent. Teens and adults of any age will have a harder time, depending on the following factors. Another unchangeable factor is native language. Each language has its own phonetic system, and, of course, sounds that don't exist in that language that do exist in English will be harder for its native speakers to learn to pronounce. It can also be difficult for speakers of Latin-based languages to adapt themselves to words that look the same or similar in English but that are pronounced very differently. Finally, some people have an ear for the sound of a language that allows them to master pronunciation better and faster than others. There are two main best practices for teaching pronunciation. The first is the idea of supportive fun. The most important thing in teaching pronunciation is to create a warm, fun environment that reduces students' anxiety about saying things wrong and making mistakes. Since it's very difficult to perfectly imitate the sound of another language, students go into lessons in pronunciation knowing they will make mistakes. In order to minimize their fears and shyness, teachers should make sure they treat it as fun and not a grim activity. Ways to do this include showing videos of comic segments based on accents, including accents in English. Teachers can also emphasize and even joke about the fact that English does not have a predictable system of pronunciation, unlike Spanish or other Latin languages, for example, in which each letter is always pronounced the same way. Making sure students feel accepted as they are will increase their willingness to play along and practice the unfamiliar. Second, correct students, but be sure not to shut them down. In teaching speaking, including pronunciation, you will constantly have to monitor students' errors and decide whether and how to correct them. This means also balancing between students' common expectation that the teacher will or should correct 100% of their mistakes and the need to keep the communicative flow going. In the real world, their mistakes will almost never be corrected unless they make their speech truly unintelligible. So the classroom is a place to offer gentle, simple correction. New teachers often fear that correcting their students will discourage them from speaking. However, it is important that teachers offer some correction for several reasons. First of all, not correcting an error will be taken by the student as positive reinforcement of the error, which, over time, could become a habit. Second, research shows that all students in a classroom learn from the correction of one individual, and these corrections also teach them to correct one another. There are many ways in which students can practice pronunciation, from simple imitation to independent presentations. First, there's repetition. This is the simplest technique, and it's when a teacher says a word, phrase, or sentence, and then the students repeat it individually or collectively. This gets boring very fast, but done in small doses, it can also be a good way to energize a classroom after a quiet activity like reading. Second, reading out loud is another way to practice accent. It too can be taxing as it is not interactive, though some students can read a dialogue in pairs. 3. Practice makes perfect. Once students have learned a formula or script, they can practice it with a partner. Making the conversation about them will keep them motivated to communicate while also paying attention to their pronunciation. 4. Independent presentations are good ways for more inhibited students to practice their pronunciation if they're given enough time to prepare. And you can also teach students to self-correct by identifying what sounds they have the most trouble with, writing a sentence for them that emphasizes these sounds, and then practice speaking that sentence correctly. Other variations of this include choosing a short audio or visual clip to listen to and then imitate while recording themselves. Encourage them to listen to a recording of their own speech and then correct their own mistakes. Thank you for watching this EN 331 presentation on pronunciation.